Good morning. That was pretty good. We'll try one more time. Good morning. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks very much for being with us this morning. We saw some of you yesterday for a very exciting announcement where we get to announce the host of the 2027 Bassmaster Classic. So thank you those who were there with us yesterday and back with us again today. We've got a very special guest here with us today to separate fact from fiction of last night's hour and 47-minute State of the Union address. He's not here to do that. But if you do have questions, direct them to him, not me. This event has been targeted by weather for the third consecutive year. 2 years ago, when we kicked this thing off, it was typhoon season. And then last year, I think it was about 9 degrees. And this year, we welcomed ice and the weather. And I'll be here all night. Yeah, and so it took us a month to finally get to the 2026 forecast, but we're really excited to bring this information to you for the third consecutive year. There is quite a lot of noise out there about how the economy is doing, and more importantly, how does that affect Greenville specifically, right? There's a lot of things, you know, in our industry. We talk about inbound international travel, and we talk about, you'll hear terms like K-shaped economy and all those kind of things. And in some cases, Greenville is insulated from them. Some cases, Greenville is exposed to that kind of risk. And so when we have the ability to bring in somebody to help us understand that, it gives us a real privilege to be able to share that information with you. Last year, I got on stage twice and failed to mention that we talk a lot about hotel performance and hotel data in these slide decks. And our hotel friends can sort of earmuffs for just 1 second, but I will just say that we use that because hotel rooms are a proxy for all of the other things going on in our market. And the vast majority of the time that somebody travels here, it's not because they're here to stay in the hotel room. The hotel room is sort of a necessity, but they're here for conferences or conventions or sporting events or leisure travel or a whole host of things that they might travel for. And that's what we're going to get into today. And so without further ado, please help me welcome for the second year in a row from Tourism Economics, Mr. Darryl Cronk.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. So most economists, myself included, we discover early in our careers that our friends and family's attention span for economics is about 1 minute long. We learned that very few people share our unusual enthusiasm for a topic that many people find boring or dry. So in order to try to deal with that, we try to simplify the message. And economists have determined, for whatever reason, that the best way to simplify the message is to use the alphabet. So, for example, the great financial crisis became the U-shaped downturn. And then the pandemic became the V-shaped recovery. And so, and Heath alluded to this, we've now adopted yet another letter of the alphabet, the letter K. And so you may have heard reference to a K-shaped economy. Unfortunately, the letter K, it doesn't seem to have the same eloquence as a U or a V, because when I say K-shaped economy, I'm more often greeted with blank stares and confused looks. Like, how does a K describe the economy? So we're going to look at a few examples of where we're seeing the letter K show up in the economic data, and then perhaps more importantly, look at how is that affecting travel. Can we find K-shaped trends in the travel data when we start looking at that? So we're going to begin with the latest jobs report. Basically, hiring has slowed. January spike notwithstanding. We don't think the January spike in employment is an indicator of what's to come this year. Over 70% of the jobs added in January came in one industry, the healthcare industry. Healthcare is not considered cyclical, meaning it doesn't tend to rise and fall with the economic cycle. Instead, it's driven by demographic factors. Aging population increases demand for healthcare. When we look at more cyclical industries that do tend to mirror the economy, those aren't showing that same type of hiring burst. So what we do think happens this year is that hiring looks a lot like it did last year. So this graph is showing the average number of jobs added each month of the past few years. As you can see in 2025, not many jobs were added each month. The slowest pace of hiring we've seen in years. And in fact, it's to the point we're starting to get some questions and concerns around what's called a jobless expansion. So the economy grows, measured by gross domestic product, or GDP, but hiring doesn't grow. So how can you have growth without adding more employees? Well, one is productivity. Businesses are getting good at getting more out of the same number of workers. Another is overhiring. So coming out of the pandemic, a lot of industries rushed to rehire people, positions that had been laid off or let go, and in many cases, they kind of got ahead of themselves and overhired. So right now, we're in a situation, a lot of industries are saying, we have enough employees, we're realizing some productivity gains, we can grow without adding more jobs. So we think the job market's going to remain fairly soft this year. And we see that in a couple of these lines. The red line is what's called the hiring rate. It's the percentage month to month, number of jobs added, and you can see that's been trending down over the past couple of years after spiking in the wake of the pandemic. But interesting, the blue line is the layoff rate. What percentage month to month are jobs being eliminated, layoffs and cutbacks? That number is actually at historic lows. So while companies aren't hiring, they're also not firing. They're not laying off. So it's, to use an old U2 song, if you're a U2 fan, they have a song called Stuck in a Moment, I Just Can't Get Out of It. That's kind of where the labor market's at. It's not hiring, it's not firing, it's just kind of stuck in place for now. We've seen unemployment rate tick up over the past year. So apologize if you notice the discrepancy. The headline says 4.4. That was December. And then I recently updated the graph with January, but forgot to change the header. So apologize, 4.4 versus 4.3. But it doesn't change the trend. The trend has been up over the past year. Now notice I just said that companies aren't laying off. So if companies aren't cutting back, what's driving higher unemployment? It's because hiring is so slow, you can't absorb new entrants into the labor force. So the labor supply is growing faster than demand job hiring. So people enter the labor force, they can't find a job, they end up being counted as unemployed. And this is where we can see our first K-shaped trend, because if we take that unemployment rate of 4.3%, but break it out by age, we see a different pattern. Young people, 20-somethings, unemployment rate for their age group has trended up fairly significantly over the past year. So people coming out of high school, out of college or grad school trying to find a job, they're struggling to find jobs. Conversely, older people, been in the workforce longer, companies aren't laying off, so they're pretty secure in their employment. So we've got a situation where young people, unemployment going up, older, more experienced workers, unemployment flat or down. You start to see those trends moving in different directions. Looks like the letter K. And this is having a side effect of, if you look for the silver lining, if you will, if you've got people young people that can't find work, what do they end up doing? They move back home with mom and dad, right? So the percentage of 20-somethings living at home is the highest since the pandemic right now. So just think of the quality time you're getting with your family. You know they can't find a job and they're living in your basement, but you got quality time together. And so let's talk about tariffs for a moment. I'm sure you've heard in the news, there was an announcement on Friday. The Supreme Court struck down what were called the IEEPA tariffs, International Economic Emergency Powers Act, said they were unconstitutional. Basically, that announcement changed everything but changed nothing. We're not changing our macroeconomic forecast because of that. We expected that. Most economists that study international trade, most legal experts in that field had said, yeah, the president had overstepped. Those would likely be struck down. But there are other avenues, other levers that the administration can use to keep tariffs in place. So we think they're going to stay in place. We're not expecting any significant change in tariff policy going forward. On the bright side, let's acknowledge tariffs are raising a lot of money, billions of dollars every month. But let's be realistic about that. There's been some talk, I've heard some people say, well, it's going to help offset the deficit. It's not going to offset the deficit. The tariffs are not going to solve our U.S. debt problem. In fact, their tariff revenue will barely cover the cost of the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed last July. So between increased spending and some tax cuts in that bill, the tariff revenue is basically going to offset that. really is not going to affect the national debt. It is affecting prices, and that's when tariffs were first announced. That's what most people focused on, was the price effect. So the orange, or excuse me, yellow segment of these bars, that's goods prices. Notice how big those bars are after the pandemic. Remember the supply chain issues and shortages, and you go to the store and couldn't find things you wanted? That drove up goods prices. But then notice those yellow portions basically disappear in 2023, and by 2024, you find them on the bottom. They're actually negative. Goods prices are starting to retreat a little bit as we've sorted through those supply chain issues. But then they announced tariffs, and suddenly the yellow bars are back on top again in 2025. So yes, tariffs did cause inflation to go up. Perhaps not as much as some people expected. What we observed is that businesses absorbed more of the cost of the tariff than expected. They didn't pass it on. The sense was that consumers were still extremely price sensitive because of a couple years of really high inflation after the pandemic. So businesses basically absorbed a significant portion of the tariff cost. If you're running a business and one part of your cost structure goes up, squeezes your margins, what do? You find a way to offset that somewhere else. We think that affected hiring. One of the reasons hiring has been so slow, businesses have embraced productivity, is to try to offset the cost they've absorbed from some of these tariffs. Tariffs have not driven manufacturing. So say, well, we're going to use tariffs to try to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. Arguments can be made that 5, 10 years from now we'll see the impact. There's some skepticism around that, but certainly in the near term we're not seeing it. Manufacturing employment has actually been declining for most of the past year. And put it all together, consumers aren't feeling really good right now. Consumer confidence and consumer sentiment has been trending down. When you look at some year-over-year comparisons, you see significant declines from this time last year. Consumers aren't really feeling that good about things at the moment. And that leads to really the core of the so-called K-shaped economy. So a lot going on in this chart. The 3 lines, yellow, red, blue, that's the share of income being spent on discretionary items. So let's make the difference. Discretionary is basically you choose what to spend on. And contrast that with necessities or essentials, which would be food, shelter, clothing, the things you need to live. And so the top line, the blue line, that's high-income households. Notice their share of income going to discretionary items is trending up. Remember the labor market trends? So high-income households, they tend to be older, more experienced. Hiring is solid, layoffs are low. Stock market going up strongly the last 2 years. So those high-income households have money to spend. Contrast that with the red line, middle-income households. Their budgets are being squeezed by the previous bout of inflation. Rents are up, food costs are up, other costs have gone up. So they have less money available for discretionary spending. So that's where we see kind of the real heart of the so-called K-shaped economy. High-income households tend to be doing well. Middle and lower-income households are struggling. Their budgets are being squeezed. So how does travel react to these economic trends? Well, we'll start with the airline industry. Basically, air travel was flat last year. So the graph is TSA checkpoint volume, number of people going through the security checkpoints in all U.S. airports. 2024 was a record high. So to say last year was flat, well, but it was flat at an all-time high. So not a terrible picture. But we can see the K-shaped economy in air travel because in January on Delta's earnings call, the president of Delta announced that premium cabin ticket sales were up 9%. Main cabin ticket sales were down 7%. So again, you're seeing that high-income traveler apparently doing well. Middle, lower-income travelers are hurting. They're the ones in the main cabin seats. When we turn to the hotel demand, we see a similar trend. Hotel demand was basically flat last year, down 0.5%. And this was the second year in a row of basically no growth in overall hotel demand. And when we break down hotel demand, we again see that K-shaped pattern. If we look at it by hotel class, luxury, upper income, hotels at the higher end of the hotel spectrum, demand's going up, and it's above pre-pandemic or 2019 levels. Hotel demand at the lower end of the hotel spectrum, economy, properties, independents, demand is trending down and is actually below 2019 levels. So again, just like in the airline industry, we can see this K-shaped pattern in the hotel demand. And of course, probably the biggest impact that in the travel industry we've been watching is the impact of international travel. Overseas travel was down about 2.5% last year. The graph goes through November. December was also down. It's not all bad, though. So a little glimmer of optimism. When we say overseas travel was down, that's a very broad statement. In fact, almost half of the 20 largest origin markets grew last year. So we are seeing growth from some markets, but overall, international travel is down. Now, this is overseas. That excludes Canada and Mexico. Mexico is a good story. Arrivals to the U.S. from Mexico were actually up more than 8% in 2025. Canada, on the other hand, if you haven't heard, had a bad year. Arrivals to the U.S. from Canada declined more than 20% last year. And it's not as if the Canadian economy was in bad shape. It's not as if Canadians stopped traveling and stayed home. If you look at Canadian travel to international destinations other than the U.S., it was up about 8% last year. Canadians were still traveling. They were choosing not to travel to the U.S. And yet, despite all this, at Tourism Economics, we are actually, we'll call it cautiously optimistic about the outlook for this year. So let's look at why. Well, first of all, that K-shaped pattern, let's remember that the travel industry skews towards higher income households. Higher income households account for the majority of travel spending. So while the K-shaped pattern has implications for the overall economy, for the travel industry, it's less of a concern because we tend to skew towards higher income households. We think the economy is going to pick up this year. We're forecasting about 2.8% growth, some of that coming from stimulus from last year's fiscal bill that was passed, both on the business side and on the consumer side. Now, at the beginning of the year, we talked about reduced uncertainty. And the idea was, by the end of last year, it seemed like things were settling. There was less fluctuation around tariffs. Things had kind of quieted down. And businesses can make decisions, even with tariffs. As long as you know, to use a football analogy, you know the rules of the game, you can create a game plan. But if the rules of the game keep changing, tariffs are on, they're off, they're up, they're down, these are excluded, those are excluded. That was the issue with last year. By the end of the year, that seemed to have settled down, so we thought reduced uncertainty, businesses can start to make investment and hiring decisions knowing the rules of the game. Now, the last few weeks, I've started to be less certain about the uncertainty this year, whether it's Greenland or threatened tariffs on Western Europe when they didn't support Greenland, and I don't know. So we think that the level of uncertainty will reduce as we go through the year. We think the level of tariffs will be about where it is. We're not expecting significant increases. So that should create a more stable environment for businesses to make decisions and make investments. The fiscal stimulus bill passed will stimulate activity this year. That's a busy chart. Here's the one that matters. Those benefits accrue to high-income households. If you look at the tax deductions and the stimulus and offset that against the impacts of tariffs and higher cost, it's actually a negative impact for low-income households, and the benefits accrue to high-income households. Again, for the travel industry, that's not entirely bad because we skew towards higher income households, but it does suggest the so-called K-shaped pattern is likely to persist through the year. We think inflation is coming down this year. You can see the blue line, that was last year's forecast, and then tariffs hit, and yes, inflation bumped up. It is trending back down. We think it's approaching that 2% target by the end of this year. And wages are growing. So the red line is wage growth, and then you put in, well, where's inflation? And wages are growing faster than inflation. That means real or inflation-adjusted wages are positive, and that's an indication of strong consumer spending. And again, back to the uncertainty, the red line there is a survey of businesses asking about employment plans or hiring plans. The last few months, that's been trending up. That suggests businesses do want to hire more workers, but we're not seeing it happen yet. If we get reduced uncertainty, if there's some clarity and things kind of stabilize, there's an indication that later this year, we may see some of those hiring plans actually come to fruition. And then we think investment spending goes up. And this is positive for travel because when business investment goes up, that tends to correlate with business travel. So last year's investment was driven almost solely by AI and big data centers and tech investment. We think that's going to broaden this year. Some of those accelerated depreciation and other incentives passed last summer in the bill will incentivize more business investment this year. And then back to the consumer. The one on the left, the blue chart, that's net worth, household net worth. A lot of that's being driven by the stock market, but net worth is at all-time highs. And on the right, that red line is the debt service ratio. It's debt payments as a percentage of income. And notice how low that is. U.S. households are not saddled with debt. It's much lower than it was, say, back in 2008 and 2009, when everyone took on mortgages they couldn't afford, and then the housing industry collapsed. So household budgets are actually in a solid place, and that should be conducive for consumer spending this year. And the good news is they're spending on experiences. Consumer spending on experiences is outpacing consumer spending on goods. So for the travel industry that sells experiences, that's a positive trend. And then finally, as far as reasons for optimism, the World Cup's coming this year. We think international travel is going to turn the corner by mid-year. So these numbers, this is total international, including Mexico and Canada. It was down about 6% last year, with Canada being the biggest driver of that decline. There's a partial recovery this year. So our baseline forecast is about 2.5% growth in international travel this year. And then the World Cup will add about 1% on top of that. So total international, we're forecasting a little over 3% growth this year. Now that was a look at the big, aggregate picture, U.S. travel, U.S. economy. I want to kind of bring it down as I begin to wrap up. Let's look a little closer to this area. And so I looked at 3 states, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, and 3 indicators that historically correlate very well with hotel demand and visitor volume. And those 3 factors are employment growth, population growth, and gross domestic product, or the economy. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, all 3 are expected or forecast over the next 5 years to outpace the U.S. in population growth and in employment growth. Those are positive signs for travel. A growing population that are employed, have money to travel, will take trips. So that should drive higher travel within this region. And then if we look even more locally, the Greenville population growth has been much stronger than the overall U.S. for years and is forecast to continue to outpace the U.S. So is employment growth in Greenville outpacing the overall U.S. So again, these factors correlate with travel. So for example, employment growth within Greenville will help drive business travel in and out of Greenville. So positive indicators for Greenville's travel industry. Greenville's GDP is forecast to outpace the U.S. as well as Charleston. And overall, these southeastern states are expected to do very well over the next few years, which should be positive indications of travel within the Southeast. And within Greenville, kind of the big 3 industries driving much of this growth: manufacturing, finance, and real estate. And so with kind of that as the backdrop, I'm going to wrap up by looking at the hotel forecast. And as Heath alluded to, we forecast hotel data because it's a proxy for the overall travel industry. If people are in hotels, they're going out to eat in restaurants, they're looking for things to do, they may be going shopping. So it's an indication of the overall travel industry, and plus, it's just data that's readily available. There's a company that tracks hotel performance that we can use to generate these forecasts. And so with all these positive indicators, we're forecasting Greenville hotel performance will soften this year, which seems completely counterintuitive to everything I just said about the positive trends driving Greenville travel. So why are we forecasting hotel demand will decline about 1% in Greenville this year? There's actually a very straightforward answer. It's 2 words. It's Hurricane Helene. So Q1 of this year, you're being measured against, your comp is Q1 of last year, which was inflated by the effect of Hurricane Helene. So Q4 of 24 and Q1 of 25 had the hurricane effect in it. Now we wrap around the calendar, Q4 of last year, Q1 of this year, you're being measured against those hurricane impacts. Once we get past that, Once we get into the second half of the year, we think hotel demand then begins to normalize and begins to grow again. So the overall outlook is positive. We just have to acknowledge the situation you're in right now with those year-over-year comps. So quick summary. Yeah, there's some strains in the economy. Hiring has slowed and is expected to remain slow. Inflation has taken longer to come down than it otherwise would have. But the overall outlook is positive. There are many reasons to be optimistic, not just about 2026, but the long-term outlook, especially for Greenville, given the economic and demographic trends in the area surrounding you. So thank you for your time. There's going to be some Q&A at the end. I look forward to your questions, and I'll hand it back over to Heath.
All right, thank you. It's very difficult to do what Daryl can do, analyzing all of those squiggly lines and making sense of it for the rest of it. So we're really appreciative of all of the work that Tourism Economics does and Daryl's ability to get on stage and make sense of that. I am glad sort of we ended where he did, because we are in this sort of funky moment of like trying to navigate all of these different sort of things going on in the economy and trying to figure out how Greenville is maybe different from the rest of the United States. I go to these industry conferences. I came back last summer and I told our team, like, the mood is just really sort of dark and sort of gloomy. You've got major markets that are much more dependent on inbound international travel than a market like Greenville. They're really suffering. You have huge gateway cities that are down double digits year over year, and the mood's just sort of dark. And I'm going, yeah, we're not really feeling that, right? Things are pretty good here. And I think when we get past the numbers and realize that most of what we've been comparing to over the last 3 months, and we've seen multiple months of decline, and we're going to forecast multiple months of decline coming up. But when we get past Hurricane Helene impacts, the picture for Greenville is still quite rosy, right? We're saying roughly flat on otherwise record year. And we continue to announce new, we've got our friends from the airport here, different spots. We continue to announce new direct service into GSP. So tens of thousands of new inbound seats available by which we can sell tourism and visitor economy to this market than we had just a couple of years ago. So we've got a lot of great things going for us that many of our friends around the country can't say. Last year, we presented some of the more Visit Greenville specific data to you, and what we thought we would do this year is pivot a little bit to say, we get this data sort of on a quarterly basis, plus we're looking at different kind of data, all the time. And what we thought we would do with you today is say, here's how we're sort of interpreting this kind of stuff and how we expect to put it into practice over the next 12 to 18 months, and hope there's some things that you can take away with your own businesses that you can take advantage to, like take away practical steps to improve either sales or marketing or the way we deliver experience when we do get visitors to travel here. And so to help us do that today, our Director of Research, please help me welcome Mr. Jonathan Smith. Thank you, sir.
Okay, it might take a second for the mic to adjust to how loud I speak, so I apologize for anybody on the front row here. But thank you, Daryl, for all of that really insightful economic information, both as it relates to the macroeconomics of the United States, but also a little bit more closer to home locally here in Greenville, South Carolina. So as Heath mentioned, my goal today is to share with you how you can take that information that Daryl provided and actually have a meaningful impact on your business, right? Because that's really useful information to know. It's good information to be armed with for political conversations you may have back and forth with your friends, your families. Probably not too much, hopefully not too much. But being able to leverage that in a meaningful way to drive impact to your business is going to be really valuable as we go into 2026. As Daryl mentioned, looking forward into the future here, it might be slightly uncertain. It's stabilizing a little bit, but the real question is not going to be whether or not people will travel. We know that that's going to continue to happen, right? It's not a question of, okay, I've got $200. I'm budgeting, I've got $200. I need to do something with $100. I need to save $100, so I'm going to find an experience I can get for $100 instead of $200. Instead, what it is I've got $200 to spend. I want to make sure I'm spending that money well. I'm getting a strong value for that money. So when people are budgeting, they're not saying, all right, I'm going to sacrifice what I'm spending in travel. They're saying, all right, I'm going to take maybe money in other aspects that I might need to budget for, and I'm going to put that into travel to make sure that I can continue to provide those quality experiences for myself and family and loved ones. So it's not so much if they're going to spend, it's how thoughtfully they're going to spend, and then how they're spending that money once they actually arrive. And that's really kind of the crux of this entire presentation, is that economic uncertainty is not stopping travel, but what it does is it changes behavior. And that change in behavior actually plays into Greenville's strengths, right? Because we know that some markets, they might rely heavily on group, maybe heavily on transient. Some are just a drive, some benefit from a fly market, and then some maybe only cater to a value-based traveler or only a premium experience. But in Greenville, we benefit from a wide variety of consumers coming into our market. We have a strong leisure traveler as a result, in part to our marketing campaigns. We have strong group business. We've got our corporate businesses, our BMWs, our Michelins, our Millikens, that provide that business transient into Greenville. And then on top of that, we've got our sporting events. And again, this is just to name a few, right? But that's youth, that's amateur, college, professional, and so on. And we know that Greenville can capitalize on this because each of these different segments don't exist in silos, right? You can have someone that is a leisure traveler from a drive market that is looking for a value-driven experience. And then on the other hand, you can have someone that is with group business that's from a fly market or drive market, whichever I just said, the opposite. And maybe they're extending their stay, and they're a premium-based traveler now that they have some extra money that they're willing to spend on an extra stay in Greenville. So what we've noticed, and I know that Daryl hinted at this a little bit, but what we've noticed is that when we take the expectations for 2026 and we compare it to 2023, so the demand here, this is talking about room nights, okay, so the number of room nights we expect to sell in 2026. When we take it and we compare it to a normalized year, we exclude the impacts of Helene from 24 and 25, we notice that demand is relatively strong, right? Very slight, moderate increase there, a 0.4% increase, about 10,000 more room nights in 2026 than we experienced in 2023, and that's great, right? It means that we've got a consistent demand in our market. But what we've noticed is that quality of visit is increasing because the ADR comparison goes up $9. The ADR, for those of you that are not hoteliers, is the average daily rate. It's what what visitors are paying when they come into our hotels on average. So that's going up $9 from 2023, a little over a 7% increase. And what happens is when you take that demand strength and that growth in ADR, what that does is that compounds into a really strong revenue growth compared to 2023. That's a $25 million increase in revenue compared to a normalized year. And it's really important to remember that at the time, 2023 was a record-setting year for us. So again, exclude outlier years of 24 and 25, and this would have been a record-breaking $25 million year for us, looking back at 2023. And then as Heath had mentioned, stole maybe a little bit of my thunder, visitor spending doesn't all happen in hotels, right? So they're coming into the market, but this is a proxy because we know that only captures about 25% of visitor spending is in accommodations. 75% of that is happening in restaurants, attractions, retails, entertainments. About $500 million in restaurants, and then another $800 million in those other segments that I mentioned. And the question is, all right, well, that's $1.3 billion that we expect visitors to spend in a calendar year. And how can you and your businesses capture that, especially if you're not hoteliers, right? Because we've mentioned hotels and what we expect them to see, but it's understanding what people are coming into Greenville to experience. Because again, they're coming in and enjoying our fine hotels, those fine establishments, but it's not just the hotels that they're looking to experience and stay in the entire time they're here. They're looking to explore more than just the four walls of their hotel room. And it's the experience, right? It's the experience that they receive when they visit Greenville, because we know that 60% of visitors to any destination, they anchor their trip around some kind of signature event, some kind of purpose for their trip. Right? And that's where we deliver on things like our Fall for Greenville, our Artispheres, our Euphorias. And then we got the SEC Women's Basketball Tournament coming up in just a few weeks here. And they're coming and they're enjoying those experiences. They have a higher propensity for spend, especially when they do come for those signature events. But again, as they're not staying in the four walls of a hotel, they're not staying just at the SEC tournament, right? They're having a great time there, but then they're extending their visit outside of whatever they may be, whatever may be the purpose of their visit. And they're enjoying things like our restaurants. We know that our culinary scene has increased tremendously over the past few years, and that's highlighted by our hosting of the Michelin Guide South last fall, right? Where our destination, we had a restaurant receive a Michelin star and multiple Michelin recommended restaurants. So when they're searching for places to eat, they know that it's high quality when they come to Greenville, right? And And then as they're making those reservations, they're making those bookings, they see a headline that says that Greenville is the #1 friendliest city in the U.S. It further provides confidence that they're coming to a destination that is going to be a great experience for them. Because we know that both the leisure traveler and the meeting planner, safety, friendliness, that's one of the top concerns that they have. And in the realm of the group traveler, our sales managers, your directors of sales of the hotels are working every single day to bring groups into our markets. And last fiscal year, our sales managers secured over 270 groups to come into Greenville and experience their stay here. And what that does is when we bring groups into the market, obviously it benefits the hotel that hosts them, but it also causes, for those that are non-hoteliers, it causes what's called compression, right? And that basically just means that we bring groups into the market, we kind of artificially cut the supply of rooms available, so it increases the demand, which increases the rate. And what we have found is that any given night throughout the year, when Visit Greenville is able to put 500 group room nights on the books for that day, the average daily rate, the amount that you can sell each room for, increases by $10, right? And that's people that would have been coming here otherwise, right? It's that leisure traveler that was planning their visit, but now there's a higher demand, so they're willing to pay more, right? So it's really valuable to drive that higher quality visit. And speaking to the hoteliers a little bit, we've also found that the revenue per available room increases by about $20. So it's really valuable to understand how that group impacts the market in a really strategic way, and it's done very intentionally. All right, and then after that, the question is, okay, I'm not a hotelier. You just talked to hoteliers a little bit. What does that mean for me as a business, as a retailer, or maybe an entertainment establishment, somebody that's offering an experience outside of a hotel? Well, make it easy for those people that are coming to visit to say yes. Work with the hoteliers. Work with Visit Greenville to build out an experience, to build an itinerary, because we know that when you reduce friction, you make it easy to purchase your product, you make it easy to understand, you make it easy to choose, you make it easy to book, that you're much more likely to capture that business of the group traveler, right? Because they come in, you have the front desk provide some kind of itinerary, and then they're set. It's easy. They know exactly where to go, which restaurants to see, which state parks to go to, et cetera, et cetera. But then those group travelers, they don't just stay group travelers, right? In some aspect, they are a leisure traveler. Whether or not they extend their stay or they stay within the confines of their event. And that's where it's important to understand that K-shaped economy that Daryl and Heath both spoke on. It's understanding that the top 20% of households account for over 60% of lodging and consumer spending. So understanding how that group thinks in particular is going to be really valuable to driving a higher quality visit and more revenue to your business as we go into 2026. And that's because those top travelers, as Daryl had mentioned, Delta said that they sold 9% more premium seats, a decline of 7% in the main cabin. So what they're doing is they're upfitting their airplanes to remove some main cabin and increase the number of premium seats available, because they know that those premium travelers are willing to pay more for that experience, right? And as I mentioned at the beginning, you've got maybe a little bit towards the middle of that K there in that visual. You've got people that are still willing to spend money, but they want to make sure that it is worth it, right? And to reach both of these groups, you have to understand how they think, and they define value emotionally first. They need to make sure that it is worth their time, their money, and their effort. So the way that you can do that is make sure that you're really speaking to them. So for those value-based travelers, focus on that value. This is not reinventing the model. This is not being cheap. This is not cutting discounts. This is showing bundles that you have available. It's showing what your product is and why it's worth it. Again, it's not cutting your values, cutting your rates. It's offering and saying, hey, this is what we offer, and we know that we're worth this, right? Because if it's a race to the bottom, everybody loses, right? And then in addition to that, you've got to make sure that you're eliminating the friction. Because if it's a confusing booking process, if your policies are unclear, that's a trust killer, right? Because I know that the more clicks you have to navigate to a booking, the more you have to search for that information, the less likely you are to actually convert that consumer. And then ultimately scale up the experience. And that's a really great way of how you can speak to the premium-driven traveler, is because these people, the value and the premium, they can show up on the same day and even in the same party, right? So to scale up the experience, you can personalize, you can offer add-on packages, and you can think of ways to add a more quality or add more features to your business or your experience without changing your model. And that's what's really important and valuable, is to understand how to capture both the premium and that value-based traveler as we go into 2026. And obviously, Visit Greenville is heavily invested invested in marketing our destination and making sure that people are aware of Greenville, they intend to come to Greenville, so on and so forth. But what you all can do is understand how are people discovering your business, right? Because we know that the Visit Greenville website is a really valuable resource to get information on each of our members, on each of our hotels, but also you being able to be discoverable through your own means is incredibly important as well, right? Because we know that in 2026, digital is going to be all about discovery. At mid-2024, search engines were the #1 source by 51% of resources used to research travel and where they may spend their money. And then over the past year and a half, that's declined from 51% down to 36%. Right? That's a notable decline. It's still #1. Don't get me wrong. That's still the #1 way that people are researching and searching. But if you look at the bottom there, it's kind of turned into a 4-letter word at this point, even though it's just 2 letters. You've got the generative AI platforms, right? That went from not even being a part of this survey prior to mid-24 to 6% in 24 to over doubling in late 25 to 15%. And so understanding how to harness that and how to kind of feed the AI machine is really important, because at Visit Greenville, what we've noted is that those that are referred to our website, that navigate to our website from an AI platform, they navigate to 2 to 3 times as many web pages on our website. Right? Not only that, using geolocation data, we've been able to identify that they're 2.7 times more likely to show up in the destination. So being discoverable, understanding that people that navigate to your site from AI, they're further down the funnel. They're ready to convert. You just have to convince them of it. Right? And that's where they're doing that final research to understand your product or your experience. So the way that you can feed the AI machine, make sure that your website is up to date, it's accurate, you don't have conflicting information on there, right? So if somebody shows up on a Sunday, because that's what AI told them, it's your business, that you're open on a Sunday, they show up on a Sunday and you're closed, they're not coming back, right? If you have the wrong hours that are up there and they show up an hour or two early, they're probably not going to come back to your business. Right? So being able to feed that is really important, not just for the consumer that might visit and make a mistake, but also if they come back and they tell AI after doing their own research, like, hey, it doesn't look like they're open then AI isn't going to trust your website either, and they're not going to use it as a resource. Right? So it's really important to understand how that works and how you can make those conversions. What I might suggest doing is go to ChatGPT, give it your website, and say, hey, what are maybe the top 10 questions people would ask about my website, and then build out an FAQ page to answer those questions. Right? So use AI to answer AI, right? So building that out, building those website sessions really intentionally, those web pages really intentionally is going to be really valuable to feeding that AI machine. And obviously you've also got, you've got to encourage strong visitor reviews, right? The more 5-star reviews you have, the higher rated it is, the more positive sentiment that it might pull as it feeds in those responses. So as we wrap up here, as we go into 2026, the strategic priorities that we suggest that you all invest in is do effective data analysis, right? Like, so you have your own data, you've got your website data, you've got your sales data, so on and so forth. Use that in addition to the resources that Visit Greenville offers, right? In our member newsletter, we offer a quarterly insights packet that has a lot of really good, valuable information that you can use to drive your business forward. Understand what are the rooms on the books coming in the future. And use that to be really intentional about the planning and strategy of your business, because when you understand the consumer, you understand the economics of what's going on in your own business model, you're going to be significantly more successful and collaborate with the community, right? So again, if you're a business wondering, how does this relate to me? I'm not a hotelier. Work with the hoteliers. Work with Visit Greenville. Work with other local businesses around you to build a quality experience, to build an itinerary, right? Because if we know that people come to destinations for a signature event, you build that signature event, right? Because there's so much opportunity to capture more visitor spending and a higher quality visit, because they're coming, they're ready to spend money, they're ready to spend more money. So do as much as you can to work collaboratively with those in our community to deliver on those valued experiences, to drive those higher reviews, to feed the AI machine, and just to continue going with that. And then that's all in an effort to capture more spend for each visit. But ultimately, the goal of our organization and for our destination is not just to drive more heads in beds for more heads on beds. Not to just do more room nights to have more room nights. It's to drive a higher quality visit, because we know that when we drive that higher quality visit, that we're benefiting, obviously, our hotels. We're benefiting our businesses. We're benefiting our workers. But most importantly, we're maximizing the quality of life for our residents. right? And when we know that our residents are bought into the product that we have, they understand that tourism is a net good for the community and it supports their quality of life, then we will have been successful in supporting our most important stakeholders, which is everybody sitting around in this room and those that work for you and those that visit and frequent each of your businesses. And with that, I thank you all for your time. I'm going to welcome Daryl and Heath back up here for questions, but thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing what 2026 holds.
All right, go ahead. Adam is always volunteering to be our roving microphone if we have any questions for our speakers. Any brave soul want to break the ice with the first question? Ben, right in the middle. We'll pass the mic down. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much, both of you guys. As I think we talked about it last year with the net travel from international, we're seeing that in some markets. We have some hotels here in Greenville, but also in South Florida, and we're seeing that return, that demand early part of the year. Can you talk a little bit about the strength of the dollar and how that's forecasted for this year, particularly with the World Cup coming, and then your forecast for 27 being much higher for international travel?
I'll let Daryl take this one.
Sure. Yes, first about the currency. We do monitor, and our macro team forecasted the dollar. I will say, other than a few specific markets, the value of the dollar doesn't tend to be a strong correlation to travel. One of the main exceptions is Canada. They seem very sensitive to the exchange rate. But in other cases, because international travel is often planned so far in advance, they're not going to react to sudden swings in the value of the dollar once that trip's already booked. As far as the World Cup, we forecast that's going to add about 1% to the growth rate this year. And so we're forecasting baseline growth 2.5%. That's on top of last year's 6% decline. So that's not a full recovery. Some markets will recover. And as I showed, some markets didn't even decline to begin with. But Canada is the one. We're not forecasting Canada to make up the 20% decline for the next 4 to 5 years. It's going to be a long recovery from Canada.
That doesn't help when we beat them in their favorite sport.
This is true. Go hockey. Sorry, I lost it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, the World Cup, what I was going to say is the World Cup adds 1%, but obviously that's very localized. So you mentioned South Florida. They got a great draw. We went through the draw for the World Cup host locations, and Miami was one of the strongest. When you look at the teams they got, that's going to draw to South Florida. And conversely, one of the weakest draws, we felt bad for San Francisco. The teams that they got in their draw, probably not going to be really strong draws to San Francisco. So the World Cup in aggregate, we think adds about 1%. But it's going to clearly be very localized depending on the host city and what teams are playing in the city. And then real quick, 27, yes, we think by then recovery is more fully underway. So the growth rate for 27, I think we're up around 5 or 6%. But again, for Canada, that's still not getting us back to 2024 levels. Canada's recovery is going to take a while.
Right beside you, okay.
You mentioned premium cabins on flights are up and also luxury hotel. Does that take into account points stays and sort of the rewards travel, or is that a sort of a more zoomed out lens? I'm just curious how much of that affects, like if you look at an international flight in a premium cabin and it's $3,500.
Right.
Is that generated because of points, or is it actual people spending dollars on that?
The data includes both paid or using points. So I can't pull out which is which, what drove the travel decision. I could say most loyalty points do tend to skew. Again, we're back to that high income traveler. They tend to travel a lot and accumulate those points. So whether they're traveling on points or paying for it, it's still that trend of those higher income households that have the money and the points, and they're the ones we're seeing take those trips.
I'm on this side of the room now.
Oh, wow.
I'll come back to you, I promise.
Hi, I'm in an industry where we are hiring, and I'm just not seeing the quality of labor pool that I would expect given the charts you showed. Like, is there any data on who is looking for work and like what kind of growth is there in the labor pool? Because I'm kind of seeing a downturn in the quality in the labor pool that's available.
Yeah, what comes to mind is I had a graph showing two lines, what I called the hires rate and the layoff rate. Well, that's part of a bigger survey called JOLTS, because economists have weird names. JOLTS, it stands for Job Opening Layoff Turnover Survey. In that is something called the quits rate. They're actually measuring every month what % of people voluntarily quit. They're not fired or laid off, they quit. That number has come down because the quits rate, it can be a reflection of confidence. If you're confident in finding another job, you're willing to quit your current one because you think you're going to find a better one quickly or already have one lined up. When hiring slows, and it slowed dramatically last year, people start to feel like, you know what, I'm going to keep the job I have. Maybe now's not the time to change. Maybe I'm worried that if I jump jobs, I'm the new one in with the least amount of tenure. If something goes wrong, I'm first one out the door. So the quits rate has come down, and it is a reflection of a lack of confidence in the labor market. So your pool of available candidates may be impacted by some qualified candidates already have jobs that maybe have decided now's not the right time to look for a new one. So that could be limiting the pool that you're able to draw from right now.
Can we ask quickly, what is the industry you're referring to? Oh, yeah. So the other thing that kind of comes to mind is because you're not seeing the kind of turnover, it's probably not the unemployed that make up that 4.3, maybe it's a little higher here. It's not that group that you're looking for. And so coming out of that sort of post-COVID rehiring surge, I was in Charlotte, my message to our restaurants was, you're no longer competing with the restaurant down the street, right? Our restaurant workers post-COVID flocked to Amazon. They flocked to people with guaranteed minimum wages, better benefits, offers to fund educational initiatives and other things. And so I think we have to rethink that as employers. We've got wages growing faster than inflation. Are we paying people a fair wage that make them want to leave, right? And so I would say, it's a hyper-competitive hiring environment right now, because if you're looking for quality, it's unlikely that you're going to find that from those who are searching, generally speaking, right? And you're going to have to be an employer of choice, right? So you're going to have to elevate the benefits and the pay and the culture and the work experience to get the quality that you want to deliver the experience that you expect.
And someone on Heath's left had a question.
Okay, got a couple more minutes. Oh.
Hey, thank you. I guess this is more of a macro question. This is the first economic presentation I've heard in quite some time that AI wasn't like the centerpiece of it.
I timed it. It took 43 minutes to get there.
I know. I can't help myself. I work in part of my time in the software industry. So I'm just curious, obviously, where are we? What do we think is going to happen with obviously we're forecasting out 2 to 3 years. I go read Anthropic stuff, and maybe we don't anyone have jobs in 2 to 3 years, or maybe we're in utopia. I'm just curious as an economist who's obviously trying to actually make practical sense out of this. What your take on that is right now?
Yeah, we I had an AI slide and took out in the interest of time, so should have left it in. So a couple of things about AI. AI drove business investment last year. All the data centers that were being built and sucking up everyone's electricity and leading to higher energy prices and things. So that was the primary driver. Right now, we're not seeing AI taking jobs or increasing productivity. Right now, it's still early. It's in the investment stage. So tech companies are pouring tons of money into AI with the hope of getting that return 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So right now it's about business investment, and that's really what's been driving a big part of economic growth last year was coming from AI-related investment. Eventually, yes, we think it's going to have impacts. I think it's still up in the air to say what type of jobs are going to be impacted by AI. But certainly, the productivity available from some of these AI models is going to affect how we think about hiring and staffing and what role you need a person to do and what role the computer can do. But we think that's still 3 or 4 years down the road. So our immediate labor market forecasts at this point, we would say, are not taking into account the impact of AI because it's too soon.
Yeah, and I would just sort of add that it's not that the technology is not already probably capable, it's human adoption that's slowing it down, right? And so how quickly will humans adapt and adopt to what AI can do? And what worries me, right, I had a meeting the other day with somebody leading strategic planning at Clemson, and I sort of spiraled after our call because I'm entering the age of kids that are thinking about college, and when I look at charts like this, and it's the young folks that are having the most difficult time, and I'm thinking the role that AI is going to play in a lot of entry-level jobs, right? AI has got a PhD in everything, right? It can do a lot of things better than humans, but there's going to still be a need for humans. But what is that role? I don't think we know yet. And I think what will sort of pause some of that adoption is us trying to figure out what that is. I mean, the editor-in-chief of The Economist interviewed Jamie Dimon, and she said, what do you, she asked the same question, and he said, I think we will continue to grow. I think we will be more productive, but in 5 years, I think we'll have fewer employees. And that's one of the biggest banks in the world, right? So I think that's good advice. We have time for one more, is that right? Okay, last question.
Hi, I'm Trudy Carson with GSP Airport. Thank you for your presentation, very informative. Now, if you were to look at your crystal ball, South Carolina has been growing and growing. What do you see, especially Greenville in this area, is that going to continue to grow? How far? Or is there going to be a spot when it's stop?
Well, I mean, I can take this a little bit. We know as far as the hotel industry goes that right now we're kind of limited on the number of guests that we can host in our destination just because of the amount of supply that we have available. And over the next few years, our hotel pipeline we expect to increase by a good margin by the time we get to 2029. So I think that growth is happening right now as far as the visitors coming in. It's plateaued a little bit, which is why it's that quality of visit, which is where the yield will continue to be had, is more so through the rates that are being charged. Yeah. So in the future, I expect that there will be more growth because we'll have more supply and high quality supply coming into the market.
And Daryl had a chart that showed the Carolinas and Georgia, and I think the Sun Belt is going to continue to have a moment right through the early 2030s. Daryl lives in Florida, so he can maybe speak more to that. But I think we're not only benefiting from some of that Midwest and Northeast sort of migration. We are a great place to live, high quality of life. We are still very affordable compared to most places in the country, and I think Florida is experiencing some challenges, and so some folks that might have 10 years ago sought Florida as that sort of place that they might move are now looking at places still warm, still affordable, but not dealing with some of the housing costs and other issues that Florida might have. So and one of the things I would have added about Daryl's slide is not only does population and employment growth in Greenville matter to our ability to generate visitors, but those are also all of our primary target audiences, right? We think about the Carolinas and Georgia, Eastern Tennessee, that 300-mile drive radius is where we capture 3/4 of all visitation from, right? We're going to continue to expand air service thanks to you guys' great work, and those are going to be important markets for the future of Greenville as we add new hotels and new businesses and things like that. But the core of who Greenville is that base. And so as population and employment grows around us, our ability to capture a greater share of that drive travel is going to be really important too. Mm-hmm. So that's it for us today. I hope that you got a lot out of it. And if you would, please give me a hand one more time for Jonathan and Daryl. Before we leave, I just want to thank our hosts, Rome, Greenville 1. Did I get that right? They continue to elevate. I mean, if you haven't been here in a bit, the new furniture and everything in the lobby, incredible. And to our friends at Table 301 Hospitality for catering once again this morning, thank you to them. Always a great host. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank you for being with us. Excellent.
Thank you.
Better than last year.